The winter light came late to the lower streets of San Francisco in the year when Eliza May Johnson arrived. Morning did not so much break as it crept in, pale and reluctant, filtering through canvas flaps and between half-raised wooden frames that pretended to be buildings. The city was still in the making, though many spoke of it as if it were already finished and merely waiting to be claimed. The ground remained churned and soft underfoot, turned again and again by boots, carts, and the dragging of supplies that never seemed to stay long in one place. Mud clung to hems and soles, dried, then softened again with the next fog or rain. Eliza May learned quickly that days here did not begin with bells or orders, but with movement. Men rose when they wished, or when cold forced them awake. Fires were coaxed from damp wood, coffee boiled thin and bitter. The sounds were constant but uneven, hammering from one direction, shouts in a language she did not know from another, the creak of wagons, the cough of men whose lungs had already begun to give way. No sound lingered long. Everything passed. She walked carefully through this city, not out of fear alone, but habit. Her posture was reserved, her eyes alert without appearing so. She had learned long before California that attention could be dangerous. She carried her few possessions close, a worn satchel kept beneath her arm, the strap rubbed thin by years of use. Inside were letters folded and unfolded until the paper softened, a small cloth doll made by another woman whose face she no longer allowed herself to picture too clearly, and a little money wrapped in oilcloth, counted often, spent rarely. She found lodging in a crowded house near the water, a structure that leaned slightly toward the street as if tired already. The room she rented was narrow, with a single window that faced a blank wall. Light entered only at certain hours, and even then it was weak. The bed was little more than a frame and ticking stuffed with straw that shifted noisily when she lay down. At night she listened to the breathing of the other tenants through the thin boards, the muttered dreams, the occasional sob that stopped as quickly as it began. Privacy was not expected. Silence was. Work came to her without ceremony. She did not ask for it so much as accept it when it appeared. A woman who kept a laundry behind her boarding house needed another pair of hands. The tubs were heavy, the water cold even when heated, the soap harsh. Eliza May rolled her sleeves and began, shirt stiff with sweat and dirt soaked until the water darkened. Trousers carried the smell of riverbanks and men who had slept in them for weeks. Her fingers cracked and bled. She wrapped them at night and unwrapped them again in the morning. The work demanded little speech, which suited her. Men dropped off their bundles, coins counted into her palm without ceremony or thanks. Some looked at her as if she were part of the equipment, another tub or bench. Others looked longer than necessary. She learned to keep her face unreadable, her replies brief. She did not argue over payment. She noted who paid promptly and who did not. She remembered which garments returned torn or bloodied, and which returned heavier than before, pockets sagging with careless wealth. The laundry was a place where men spoke as if no one were listening. Their words floated above the tubs with the steam, careless and unguarded. They complained of claims gone dry, of partners who drank or stole, of distances misjudged and maps that lied. They spoke of gold as if it were alive, as if it chose men or rejected them according to some rule they could not quite grasp. Eliza May said nothing. She rinsed and wrung and folded, committing their words to memory without appearing to do so. She learned that the law here was thin and uneven. There were men who called themselves officers, but their authority depended on who stood with them at a given moment. Disputes were settled with fists or knives more often than with papers. A black woman, even a free one, stood outside these reckonings. This exclusion was not announced. It was simply understood. It limited her, but it also kept her unnoticed in certain ways. Men did not imagine her as a threat or a witness. They imagined her tired, grateful, replaceable. When the talk turned more often to the foothills and the camps farther east, she listened more closely. San Francisco was a place of arrival and departure. Few intended to stay long. Supplies flowed out as quickly as men arrived, chasing rumors that shifted with the seasons. Eliza May understood movement. She had crossed greater distances under worse conditions. The decision to leave the city did not come suddenly, but it settled into her thoughts as steadily as damp into wood. She left in the late months of the year, when the weather began to turn and those who had not yet found success grew restless. The road inland was crowded with wagons and men on foot, animals straining against loads that seemed heavier than their owners admitted. She traveled with others at first, then alone, keeping her pace measured. At night she slept where she could, wrapped in her coat, listening to the sounds of unfamiliar land. The mountains rose gradually, dark shapes against a wide sky. Serpent's Gulch was smaller than the stories suggested. Its main track was lined with buildings thrown up quickly, wood unplaned, nails uneven. Smoke hung low, trapped by the surrounding hills. The river ran cold and fast nearby, its banks crowded with men bent over pans, their backs rounded, their movements repetitive and quiet. Gold was spoken of often, but seen less frequently than promised. Eliza May set up her laundry at the edge of the camp, where water could be carried without too much distance and where men passed daily. Her tent was plain, its canvas patched where it had already begun to fray. Inside, the same routine took hold. Heat the water, stir the soap, scrub, rinse, hang. The rhythm of it steadied her. Days passed marked not by dates, but by loads completed and coins set aside. The camp settled into its own order, rough and temporary. Men came and went. Some stayed through the cold, their faces growing sharper, their talk quieter. Others left without comment, their claims abandoned, their names soon forgotten. Authority rested with those who had been there longest or who carried weapons openly. Disputes were frequent, but rarely resolved in any lasting way. Eliza May watched without appearing to do so. She noted which men returned each evening with dust in their pockets and which returned with nothing but silence. She observed the way certain claims were spoken of with care, their locations lowered to whispers. She noticed how some men disappeared from conversation before they disappeared from sight. In this place, absence was common enough not to alarm at first. At night the cold pressed close. The sounds of the camp faded unevenly, leaving long stretches of quiet broken by sudden laughter or violence. Eliza May lay awake on her narrow bed, listening. She did not pray for fortune. She did not expect justice. She measured her safety in small ways, the weight of her savings, the steadiness of her work, the fact that she was still overlooked. By the time the first snow threatened the higher ground, Serpent's Gulch had settled into something like routine. It was a harsh routine, built on labor and uncertainty, but it held. Men rose, dug, returned, drank, slept. Eliza May worked, saved, listened, and waited, though for what she did not yet name. The land held its silence. The camp held its breath. By the middle of the following winter, the routines of Serpent's Gulch had hardened. What had once felt temporary began to show the outlines of permanence, though no one spoke of staying. Men still talked of leaving when fortune allowed, yet they repaired roofs instead of abandoning them, and they dug drainage ditches against the snowmelt as if they expected to see another year. The camp learned how to endure itself. Authority settled in quietly. There was no formal announcement, no vote worth remembering. A man named Silas Croft began to be called sheriff because he said he was one, because he carried a revolver openly, and because no one challenged him when he settled disputes. He was not cruel in obvious ways. He listened with half an ear, made decisions quickly, and moved on. His presence suggested order, but only the kind that favored those who already held advantage. Eliza May noticed his habits early. He favored certain saloons and avoided others. He intervened swiftly when arguments involved established claim holders and delayed when the complainant was new, foreign, or alone. When disputes involved men with money, they were settled with conversation. When they involved men without it, they ended with bruises or silence. No written records were kept. Nothing remained except memory. And memory was unreliable here. The first unease crept in slowly. It did not arrive as fear but as confusion. An older prospector named Henry Hemlock failed to appear one morning. This alone meant little. Men overslept, drank themselves senseless, wandered off. But Hemlock had been precise. He rose before dawn, ate little, and returned to the same bend in the river each day. He spoke rarely, but when he did, he spoke of small certainties, weather, water levels, the steady yield of his claim. His absence went unremarked until midday, when another man used his fire pit. By evening, questions began. Croft shrugged when asked. "Plenty of men leave without saying," he said. "Plenty don't come back." The next morning, Hemlock's claim stood empty. His tent had collapsed under the weight of snow. His tools lay scattered, half-buried. It looked like abandonment, except that nothing had been taken. The small things remained: a pot, a blanket, The place felt interrupted rather than ended. Eliza May washed Hemlock's last bundle of clothes 2 days later, brought by a man who said he found them near the riverbank. She recognized the garments by their careful mending. As she searched the pockets, as she always did, she noticed what was missing. Hemlock kept a small carved bird, worn smooth by handling. He spoke of it once briefly as something his daughter had made before he left home. It was never absent. Now it was gone. She said nothing. She returned the clothes folded neatly. The man who collected them did not ask questions. Over the following weeks, talk of Hemlock faded. New men arrived. Snow deepened in the higher ground, pushing more activity into the camp. Then 2 brothers from Ohio, known only as the Millers, vanished in similar fashion. They had been loud, careless, newly confident. They spoke openly of their success, drank heavily, and paid without counting. One night they were seen celebrating. By morning, their tent stood open and empty. This time Croft appeared briefly. He looked at the site, kicked at the frozen ground, and declared that men who bragged invited trouble. He suggested they had left under cover of night to protect their gains. The explanation satisfied most. It did not satisfy Eliza May. She retrieved their laundry herself. It lay where it had been dropped, untouched. Beneath a loose board she found a small journal. She did not read it immediately. She wrapped it and hid it beneath her floorboards. That night she lay awake longer than usual, listening for footsteps that did not come. Other absences followed. A young Swede, an Irishman involved in a boundary dispute. Each disappearance carried the same quiet response from authority. No investigation worth naming, no effort beyond a few words spoken in public. Each time, a claim lay abandoned only briefly before being taken up again, its paperwork appearing clean and unquestioned. Fear did not announce itself loudly. It moved through the camp in lowered voices and shortened conversations. Men stopped boasting. They drank more quietly. They avoided certain stretches of river without explaining why. The idea of bad luck claims took hold, and superstition offered comfort where reason failed. Eliza May felt the change in small ways. Fewer jokes, more glances over shoulders. The laundry grew quieter. Men spoke less freely, yet some continued to speak as if compelled, unable to stop themselves from describing fines or frustrations. Habit overruled caution. Croft's presence grew heavier. He began to appear more often near Eliza May's laundry, not to speak to her, but to be seen. His gaze lingered longer than courtesy required. Once, when 2 men argued over payment, he intervened sharply, sending one away with a warning. The man who stayed was known to trade frequently with Arthur Finch, the merchant. Finch's store prospered as others struggled. He bought equipment from those leaving and resold it at higher cost. He extended credit selectively, his ledger always balanced. Eliza May noticed that men who spoke openly of disputes or disappearances found their credit tightened or withdrawn. Men who kept quiet fared better. None of this was discussed openly. There were no meetings, no declarations. The injustice lay in what was not done, in what was dismissed. Eliza May understood this kind of silence. She had lived under it before. It did not shout, it pressed. She began to read the journal at night. Slowly, carefully, the Miller brothers wrote plainly, without ornament. They recorded yields, weather, arguments. Then, gradually, unease entered their words, mentions of strange markings, of a rock that behaved oddly, of feeling watched. The entries ended abruptly. Eliza May closed the journal and hid it again. She did not yet know what to do with the knowledge. She only knew that the camp's quiet was no longer neutral. It was shaped, directed, and it was not meant for her protection. The snow fell heavier. The camp endured. Men disappeared. Authority explained nothing. And Eliza May continued her work, hands steady, eyes open, understanding now that injustice here did not arrive as violence first, but as neglect carefully applied. As the winter tightened its hold on Serpent's Gulch, the shape of daily life altered in ways that were subtle enough to deny at first, yet persistent enough to wear at the mind. Snow narrowed the paths between structures. The river ran lower and faster, edged with ice that cracked without warning. Men clustered closer to what warmth they could find, and with closeness came friction. Rules, such as they were, grew more defined. Claims were measured more strictly, though no new measurements were taken. Boundaries that had once been flexible hardened overnight. A man might work a stretch of river for weeks without comment, only to be told one morning that he had crossed a line he had never been shown. When this happened, Sheriff Croft was already nearby, as if summoned by the dispute itself. His rulings favored those with established ties, those who traded regularly with Finch, those whose names were spoken with familiarity. Eliza May felt the pressure indirectly at first. Men delayed payment more often. Some stopped bringing their laundry altogether, choosing to wash their own clothes badly rather than linger. Others asked questions she had not heard before, cautious questions about who else used her services, who lingered, who listened. She answered plainly and briefly. She did not ask questions in return. The camp's rhythms slowed, but tension filled the spaces left behind. Where laughter had once spilled freely from saloons, now there were long stretches of silence broken by sudden, sharp arguments. Men watched one another more closely. New arrivals were treated with suspicion rather than curiosity. Information became guarded, hoarded like gold itself. Eliza May noticed that Croft's authority was no longer passive. He posted notices warning against trespass and theft, though no thefts had been officially recorded. He threatened expulsion for troublemakers, though no one could recall anyone being formally expelled. The rules existed more as reminders of his power than as tools of order. She also noticed the movement of men she did not recognize. They arrived quietly, stayed briefly, and left without explanation. They did not mine. They spoke little. Their boots were heavier than those of prospectors, their hands steadier on weapons. They frequented Finch's store after dark, entering through the back and leaving with sacks that did not clink like supplies. The journal beneath Eliza May's floorboards grew heavier in her thoughts. She returned to it often, rereading passages until she knew them by heart. The Miller brothers had grown cautious before their disappearance, altering their routines, avoiding certain paths. They had written of symbols carved into stone, of soil that behaved strangely, of a sense that their claim was being observed by unseen eyes. These were not the words of men given to imagination. They were practical, fearful, restrained. Eliza May began to notice patterns beyond the journal. Claims that were disputed or abandoned clustered around certain stretches of land. Men who worked those areas spoke of odd sensations, headaches, nausea, tools behaving unpredictably. Most dismissed these complaints as fatigue or bad luck. Eliza May did not. She walked more often now, taking longer routes under the pretense of gathering water or supplies. She observed the land itself, the way certain rocks darkened the snow around them, the way vegetation thinned in patches without clear reason. She kept these observations to herself, storing them alongside the journal's entries. Pressure mounted in quieter ways as well. Finch's prices rose, credit tightened further. Men who questioned the changes found themselves unable to purchase essentials. Those who complied survived a little longer. Dependency replaced hope. One evening, a miner she recognized only as Thomas lingered after collecting his clothes. He spoke of poor yields, of feeling watched, of strange markings near his claim. Eliza May listened without comment, her hands busy with folding. When he left, she watched him go with a sense of unease she could not yet name. The next morning, Thomas did not appear at the river. Croft dismissed the matter quickly. "Men wander," he said. "Winter makes fools of us all." Finch adjusted his ledger. Another claim lay open. Eliza May understood then that the camp was no longer merely dangerous. It was being shaped deliberately. The pressure was not accidental. It narrowed choices, forced compliance, and erased those who resisted or stumbled upon something they were not meant to see. She felt the weight of her knowledge grow heavier with each passing day. The journal, the land, the patterns she alone seemed to notice, all of it pressed against her silence. Yet she also knew that speaking too soon would invite the same quiet ending as the others. So she waited, she worked, she watched, and she felt the walls of Serpent's Gulch draw closer, tightening around everyone within it, leaving fewer places to stand without consequence. The moment when matters passed beyond correction did not arrive with violence in the open, nor with any declaration that could later be pointed to as the beginning of the end. It arrived quietly, in the form of a night that left no mark on the calendar and a morning that looked like all the others. Only afterward did its weight become clear. The snow had stopped falling, though the ground remained frozen hard beneath a thin crust. Smoke rose straight from chimneys in the early hours, the air too still to carry it away. Eliza May woke before daylight, as she often did, and lay still, listening. The camp was quieter than usual. Even the restless sounds of animals were absent. She dressed slowly and stepped outside, her breath clouding in front of her. She noticed the tracks first. Heavy boots had passed near her laundry during the night, pressed deep into the snow, their path leading toward the edge of camp and beyond. This was not unusual by itself, but the number of prints and their direction stirred a sense of unease she could not dismiss. She followed them with her eyes only, not with her feet, until they vanished into the darker trees. By mid-morning, word spread that a man had been taken. Not lost, not missing, but taken. The distinction mattered, though few said it aloud. The man was a stranger to most, newly arrived, quiet, careful. He had asked questions of the wrong sort too soon. Someone had seen him the evening before, speaking with Thomas near the riverbank. Someone else had heard him mention markings in the stone. No one claimed to have seen what happened. They spoke instead of sounds, a struggle, a muffled cry, then nothing. Eliza May stood at her tubs and worked as she listened. The men who spoke did so cautiously, glancing around before lowering their voices. Fear had moved beyond rumor now. It had entered certainty. Whatever had been suspected was confirmed by the knowledge that disappearance was no longer accidental or distant. It could be immediate, deliberate, witnessed. Sheriff Croft did not investigate. He did not even make a show of it. He appeared briefly in the camp, spoke to Finch behind closed doors, and left again before noon. By afternoon, the stranger's name was no longer spoken. His claim was listed as abandoned. That night, Eliza May did not light her candle. She sat in the dark, listening to the wind move through the trees and the occasional crack of ice shifting along the river. She thought of the journal beneath her floor, of the careful entries that ended too soon. She thought of Hemlock's bird, of Thomas's unease, of the tracks leading away from her door. The line, she understood, had been crossed not by the taking of the man, but by the certainty that there would be no pretense of justice afterward. The silence that followed was not ignorance. It was agreement enforced by fear. In the days that followed, the camp changed further. Men avoided one another, work slowed, disputes went unspoken rather than unresolved. Finch's influence deepened. He acquired more claims quietly, his reach extending into areas others no longer dared to work. Croft's authority became absolute through absence rather than action. He did not need to intervene. His reputation sufficed. Eliza May altered her habits carefully. She varied her routes, her hours, her interactions. She spoke less, listened more. She began to hide small items beyond the journal, scraps of maps, notes of conversations, observations about the land and the men who moved through it. She did not know yet what use these things would serve. She only knew that to survive now required preparation for an end that could come without warning. One evening, as she closed her laundry, she noticed a man watching from across the track. He did not approach. He did not speak. He stood long enough to be seen, then turned away. She recognized him as one of the men who visited Finch after dark. The message was clear enough. She had not been touched, not yet, but she had been noticed. Eliza May returned to her room and secured what little she could. She did not sleep easily. The camp lay quiet under the cold stars, holding its breath. Somewhere beyond the trees, work continued that was not meant to be seen. And within Serpent's Gulch, the knowledge settled that what had been lost could not be recovered, and what remained would be shaped by fear unless someone found a way to endure it without vanishing. The line had been crossed. There would be no turning back. After the taking of the stranger, Serpent's Gulch entered a period that many later described as calm, though those who lived through it knew better. The outward signs of disorder diminished. There were fewer arguments in the open, fewer raised voices after dark. Men kept to their work, returned to their shelters, and spoke only when necessary. It was not peace, it was compression. Eliza May understood that survival now depended on precision rather than endurance. The habits that had once sustained her, working steadily, saving carefully, remaining unnoticed, were no longer sufficient on their own. The camp had begun to observe her, not as an individual, but as a point within a larger pattern. She could feel it in the pauses that followed her words, in the way certain men lingered longer than before, in the way Finch's eyes followed her when she crossed the street. She did not respond with defiance. That would have been pointless. Instead, she refined her quiet. She made herself smaller in visible ways and larger in unseen ones. Her resistance took no public form. She did not confront Croft or Finch. She did not warn men openly. She did not speak of justice or morality, words that carried little weight here. What she did was observe, remember, and preserve. Each evening after the camp settled, she recorded what she had seen and heard. She wrote carefully, using scraps of paper gathered from discarded notices and torn ledgers. Her handwriting was plain and steady, the result of long practice under poor conditions. She noted names, dates described in relation to weather rather than calendars, movements of men, changes in claims. She wrote what Croft said and what he refused to say. She wrote what Finch bought and what he sold, and to whom. She hid these records separately from the journal, dividing them so that no single discovery would reveal everything. Some pages she tucked into seams of clothing. Others she placed beneath loose stones outside the camp. She trusted the land more than she trusted walls. She also listened more carefully than before. The laundry remained a place of inadvertent confession. Men spoke when their hands were busy and their minds elsewhere. They complained of illness, of headaches that lingered, of strange smells near certain claims. They spoke of soil that burned the skin, of water that tasted wrong. Most of these remarks were offered casually, then dismissed. Eliza May did not dismiss them. She sought out those who were already overlooked. Chinese laborers who carried supplies and cooked meals. Indigenous men who passed through the area quietly, tolerated but not welcomed. Other black women who worked as cooks and cleaners, their presence accepted but their voices ignored. With them, Eliza May spoke carefully, trading work for information, listening more than she spoke. She did not ask them to risk themselves. She asked only for what they already knew. Through these conversations, the shape of Finch's enterprise became clearer. Supplies moved at odd hours. Certain paths were used repeatedly. A secluded structure beyond the main camp emitted a sharp, metallic odor that clung to clothing. Men who worked there did not stay long. Some left the region entirely. Others grew sick. Eliza May never approached the structure herself. She did not need to. She understood enough to know that what lay there was dangerous, not only in its secrecy but in its substance. Whatever was being taken from the earth was not meant to be handled carelessly. It harmed those who touched it without knowledge or protection. This explained the disappearances as much as the violence. Some men were silenced because they knew too much, others because they had been exposed. Her resistance lay in preservation. She kept the knowledge alive in a place designed to erase it. She committed details to memory that paper might not survive. She mapped the camp and its surroundings in her mind, noting which claims changed hands quickly, which were avoided, which were worked only by Finch's men. She also secured herself. With her savings, she purchased a small plot of land near the edge of camp, not for mining, but to build a more permanent structure for her laundry. The act was practical, but it was also symbolic. In a place defined by impermanence, she claimed stability. The building gave her stronger walls, a place to hide her records, and a visible reason to remain without raising suspicion. Some noticed the change. Finch commented on it once lightly as if amused. Croft said nothing, neither intervened. For now, her usefulness outweighed any concern. Eliza May did not imagine herself as a savior or a reformer. She did not believe that truth alone could correct what had been done. Her resistance was narrower and more deliberate. She intended to survive, and in surviving, to carry forward an account that could not be entirely erased. If justice came, it would come later, through time, through records, through memory. Until then she worked, she listened, she wrote, and she waited, knowing that quiet resistance required patience equal to fear and that the cost of a single misstep would be final. By the time spring began to soften the higher ground, Serpent's Gulch had learned how to deny itself. The camp did not claim that nothing had happened. It claimed instead that nothing unusual had happened. The distinction mattered. Misfortune was acceptable, pattern was not. Sheriff Croft's office, such as it was, became a place of waiting rather than action. Men came with questions and left with none answered. Croft listened without writing, nodded without committing, and offered explanations that shifted with the speaker. A man who complained of theft was told that desperation bred dishonesty. A man who asked about disappearances was reminded that the wilderness had always taken its share. A man who pressed too hard was advised to move on for his own good. These responses were consistent in one regard: they never led anywhere. Eliza May observed the process from a distance. She did not approach Croft herself. She did not need to. Others did, and she learned from their attempts. One man, newly arrived and already frustrated, demanded to know why his claim had been reassigned while he lay ill. Croft listened, then asked where the man had been working. When the location was named, Croft's expression shifted only slightly. He declared the reassignment proper and suggested the man had failed to maintain his boundary. The matter ended there. Finch's role in this denial was quieter but more pervasive. He controlled the flow of supplies, credit, and information. Men who questioned the order of things found themselves unable to purchase what they needed. Those who spoke of strange findings discovered that buyers were suddenly uninterested. Finch did not threaten. He did not need to. His ledger spoke for him. The camp's informal institutions followed suit. The saloons discouraged certain conversations. The general store became a place of transaction only, not gathering. Even the riverbanks grew quieter. Men worked without speaking, eyes down, movements careful. Those who had seen too much learned to pretend they had seen nothing. Eliza May felt the pressure of denial most sharply when she tried to verify details she already knew. She asked careful questions, framed as curiosity rather than accusation. She inquired about the history of certain claims, about men who had worked them before. The answers she received were vague or contradictory. Names were forgotten, dates blurred. The past became malleable. This erasure was not accidental. It was maintained through repetition and fatigue. To remember accurately required effort. To forget required only time. She saw the cost of this denial in the men themselves. Some drank more heavily, others grew withdrawn. A few left the gulch abruptly, abandoning whatever hopes had brought them there. Those who remained learned to adapt. They avoided certain paths. They accepted losses without protest. They learned the boundaries that were never formally drawn. One afternoon, Eliza May witnessed a brief exchange that revealed the structure beneath the denial. A miner attempted to sell a small quantity of unusual ore he had found near an abandoned claim. Finch examined it briefly, then returned it without comment. Later that day, Croft spoke with the miner. By evening, the man had decided to leave the region. The ore was not mentioned again. The institution did not need to punish openly. It only needed to close its doors. Eliza May continued her record-keeping, though she grew more cautious. She reduced what she wrote, relying more on memory. She divided her notes further, ensuring that no single cache could reveal the full scope of what she knew. She trusted no one fully, not even those who shared her unease. Denial thrived on misplaced confidence as much as on fear. At times, she questioned the purpose of her vigilance. The camp showed no sign of correcting itself. The machinery of silence functioned smoothly. Finch prospered. Croft remained unchallenged. The men who had vanished were spoken of only in passing, if at all. The land absorbed their absence without protest. Yet Eliza May understood that denial required constant maintenance. It depended on fatigue, on distraction, on the belief that nothing could be changed. Time was both its ally and its enemy. Records survived when people did not. Memory, when preserved, resisted reshaping. She did not know when or how the truth might surface. She knew only that her role was not to force it into the open prematurely. To do so would invite the same institutional response that had already erased others. Her task was narrower and more patient, to endure the denial without surrendering to it, and to carry forward what the institutions worked so carefully to suppress. Serpent's Gulch continued under its chosen silence. The river ran, the claims shifted hands, the official story held, and beneath it, unacknowledged and unresolved, the truth remained, waiting for a moment when denial could no longer contain it.